Welcome to Weather and Wine, the video podcast addressing risk. Risk is a pressing yet important topic that most humans actually don't want to think too much about and therefore do not talk that much about. Today, we're going to talk about risk. We're going to address risk from four main topics being trade, technology, weather and workforce. These risks can actually be more concrete and be listed as cyber risks. It could be movement, demographics, wildfires, even armed conflicts. My name is Karl Roquet. Let's enjoy the ride.
Annika Wallenskog, former Chief Economist at the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions, has been a central figure in Swedish public finance throughout her long career. With her deep insights, she has shed light on the economic challenges and opportunities facing municipalities and regions. Don't miss the chance to hear Annika share her experiences and thoughts on the risks of the future.
Annika, would you be happy to share your thoughts a little bit on demographics and what your views and expectations are on these matters?
Yes, a problem with the demographics is there's a lot of people who were born after the Second World War, and Sweden was one of the countries that started to give birth to babies early after the Second World War. So that's a very large amount of the people who were born at that time. And now they are beginning to be a bit more than 80. So the aging people are even getting older, so the next 10 years they will be around 85 and 90 years old, and they will need a lot of health care and also being taken care of in elderly care systems. The other Nordic countries have a more difficult situation than Sweden, but it will come a bit later than Sweden because they didn't start to have babies as soon as we did.
The same challenges, but with a slight delay for the other countries.
That's right.
And are there any learnings that we have made in Sweden or that you have done in your current profession that we should think about and be more aware about in the society as a whole? And how can we actually work with this more actively?
Yeah, the problem now is also that we have a very low birth rate per female, and we haven't had that before. And I think some of the reasons that we haven't had that is because we have daycare for the children, and we also have very good benefits. You can stay at home with your child for at least 1 year, for example. And that's not the same situation as you have further down in Europe, which makes that we give birth to more children, or we have given birth to more children per woman in Sweden than compared to the south of Europe. And also the same situation is almost the same, at least in the other Nordic countries. But now we see that the birth rate also decreases, so we give birth to fewer and fewer children. And that's a problem. And another problem is that we have a few of the people living in Sweden comes into the age where you work. Especially the age is now, the next 10 years, the age is between 25 and 60 will only be 13,000 people more the next 10 years than they are today.
Yeah.
And so we have a problem with labor force, and also we have a problem that no children will be born, or very few children will be born compared to the situation we've had before. So we have to close down a lot of schools and preschools the next coming years if it won't change. And we don't, the Statistic Bureau in Sweden says that it will change in the next 5-6 years, but only slightly upwards.
And someone has to pay, I guess. And what's your view on that? Do you expect us to be expected to work longer in our life, or are we actually do we have to lower our expectations on the social welfare that is paid out of tax proceeds? And is it more leaning towards privatization, or how do you see that? Looking into the crystal ball.
Yeah, I see some solutions. One is, of course, working up to 68, for example, since we live so much longer also. We have so many years as being pensionists, like compared to before. But another solution is also AI, if we can use AI or if we can digitalize a lot of the services we do. For example, if you have a sickness that you will have for a long time in your life, you can monitor your sickness by yourself. I mean, already now you have mobile phones, but if you monitor your condition by yourself, and then the hospitals can see, well, now this is happening, the rates of blood pressure or whatever is changing, now we need to give new medicines, or now we need to operate, or things like that.
So in essence, making the welfare system more efficient by utilizing AI and not having as many patients going in on a regular basis.
For example. Yeah. So there's a lot we can do with new AI systems and digitalization of the welfare systems. So that's another possibility to make it better.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, what we have done in Sweden for a lot of years, we've had a lot of immigration, and immigrations in a time in life where they already have an education, for example. That will make things smoother. And we also see a lot of differences within the country, since we are a vast country, and in some of the municipalities there are no possibilities to find people working in elderly care, for example.
That's a very interesting point.
Yeah.
And I think it segues into one of my other questions, actually, the differences between urban and rural areas in the whole Nordics, actually. Some major cities we have urbanization, but still from a democracy perspective, we need to actually offer healthcare, also schools to the whole population. And I guess that AI, you mentioned that could be a way of it, but what's your view on that, and how good have the Nordic countries been on actually addressing this historically, and what have we learned, and what can we take further into the future with us?
In Sweden, we were very early with digitalization, and the problem with that is that we now have a lot of systems that are very old, and we have to remake the system, and that's more complicated than to build new systems now, and that's a problem. And also AI, we use it, but in different places, and we don't have any solution for the whole of Sweden. It's like islands with AI solutions in different places. And we see also that we have different solutions in the Nordic countries. For example, in Norway, if you go to the northern parts of Norway, they have, for example, if you have studied, you deduct 10% of your study loans if you move to these towns, or you have lower employment fees and things like that. So they have special zones in Norway where they have special rules, which we don't have in Sweden, for example.
And is that working in Norway? Has that paid off, so to speak?
Yeah, they don't have that much difference for getting people to move, or they don't move away from the northern parts of the system. But they complain, of course, in the south of Norway, for example, which they probably would do in Sweden too. But I mean, like in Kiruna, for example, they have people flying in and flying out to work in elderly care.
Yes.
You cannot do that for a long time.
And how would you say that we can work around that in a more efficient way? And who is responsible? Should that be driven by the government side, the municipalities, or by the corporate side of the society? Because, Kiruna is a good example, strong corporates being active there. But who should take on the lead, and what are your expectations and also your experience from SKR or Salar? Actually, what works and what does not?
I can see there's been a big change in Sweden, for example. If you go back 20, 30 years ago, when we did a new, like starting a mine or something like that, we did it together. The government, the municipality, and the private companies, they worked together. Now we need to do this, we need a railway, we need to have houses, we need to have railways, we need to have people who drills in the mine or something like that. Everybody worked together, and they kind of, I mean, they didn't care so much who paid this and who did this. And nowadays, I think it's so split up. I mean, the companies, the municipalities and the government, they don't work together. Everybody thinks of themselves. And I think that's a problem. I think we should do more things together. Since we are in the green transition now, if we want this to work, I think the government needs to take a bigger responsibility than they do today. Today, some municipalities takes a lot of responsibility. The problem is, what will happen if people don't move there? Will they have big loans that the people who lives in this municipality need to pay? Or what will happen?
And in your role as chief economist, would you suggest, what I hear is that number one, we need better collaboration and communication between the parties. And I think that's a really good takeaway, because that's also why we're having this podcast, actually talking about big risks and talking about them in a holistic way, actually. They are not isolated in any way. And that also goes to what you refer to when it comes to AI and technology, that a lack of collaboration actually hinders us from working together. But also you mentioned that the government must step in, or the municipalities, or the official side of the society should actually take a larger responsibility. And how could that be done? Wearing your chief economist hat, you're referring to loans, for instance. Could that different regulations, or what do you see there?
Well, what I see is that the government, maybe municipalities that makes it happen, that the job will start in this municipality. Maybe they could have lower employment fees to the government or things like that. Like in Norway, where they have this economic zones, for example. Or is there another possibility? And also I think that the government needs to put in more money for like railroads and also electrifying or the electric system, but also the transition of the electric systems. So I think there's a lot of things to do from the government. But I mean, they say we want to help, but not with money. We want to help with everything else but money. And then some municipalities puts in lots and lots of money to make this happen. And
policies are beautiful, money talks.
Yeah. And I mean, because we talk about risk in this program, don't we? The risk, if we don't do this, there will be no production of batteries for cars or green steel in Sweden. And where do we buy this? There's nobody else in Europe who does it. And in Sweden, we have the surface, we have ore, we have labor, we have cheap energy, for example, compared to lots of other places in Europe. So nobody else will do it. Sweden tries to do it. But if it won't work, we need to buy it from China, for example, or America or Canada. Do we really want to be dependent on them, the way things look today?
Yeah, because that's, political implication, security risks that you're addressing as well. And I think we're all hearing more or less the same messages from the government leads throughout the Nordics. We are in a time, uncertainty when it comes to political unstable and even war ongoing in Europe. But the interesting thing that I think we really haven't squeezed out is how well are the governments, connected in the political system throughout the 4 Nordic countries to actually act? Because you mentioned municipalities' ability to attract talent, for instance. How well are the policies linked throughout the system, if you get what I mean? From top prime ministers and presidents and every, what we have, and down to...
Yeah, maybe the Nordic countries need to step up together, because when I talk to the Finnish municipalities, they think we are in the same situation that you are in Sweden. They also think this is a problem, because they've also tried to start these kind of companies. So it's been tried in the Nordic countries, But we haven't reached the point where this is really going well now. And it takes a while, and you need to be persistent. You can't just say, well, as I think a lot of people in Sweden do, well, this is a problem. We should put government's money, we shouldn't put the tax money into this. Well, if you don't do it, what will happen then?
Yeah. And it's not all about quick fixes either. You
No.
know? Yes, of course.
This will take a very long time.
Yes. Because I heard on another podcast actually about battery manufacturing.
Yeah.
And the Chinese are world leading in that. They have one company actually supplying 37% of all batteries going out into the world.
Yeah.
And the question was, what can we as a Nordic region do? And the answer was, you need to have educated people. So we're like on the back foot with 5 to 7 years already, because we do not have electrochemistries that they do in China. They educate 100,000 of them. And in both Europe and also in the US, that has not been a trade that you want to study for. So it's not a quick fix, and we need to plan for the future.
But it's not impossible. I mean, Sweden is a country where we manufactured Air Force planes.
Yes.
So it's possible, absolutely.
Closing a little bit the chapter on demographics and moving into other parts where people matter actually. Could be closely linked to demographics as well, but looking into the pandemic now. You have vast experience from working throughout the pandemic. You were vital part of actually how Sweden responded to the pandemic, but have also good visibility on how the other Nordic countries responded. And what would you say were the major weaknesses? Because I think we can all be in agreement that it showed some weaknesses and some historic challenges. And what were the major ones that you identified through the pandemic?
The weaknesses, which, I mean, it was the problem that we didn't really know that there was a pandemic going on, or that people were contagious. They came home from the Alps where they had the winter holiday, and it took quite a long time before we did any actions, which made a lot of people living in elderly care homes actually died, because we didn't react in the right way, and we didn't separate people in those places. And after a while, so many people were contagious that there wasn't very much reason to do anything. I mean,
no.
It had spread.
We were taken by surprise a little bit. And I think it's interesting, going back to, not to Wuhan perhaps, but I actually been to Wuhan. I'm one of the few Swedes that been to Wuhan, I guess. But starting with what you said, for instance, in Sweden, because it's interesting also to understand how the reactions and the response from society and governments, etc., if that was reflected in the underlying situation. And would you say, looking at with a Nordic lens, would you say, you mentioned the Swedish winter break, was Sweden worse off when it came to actually the spread of the virus initially compared to the other countries?
Yeah, it started sooner in Sweden, probably because of the winter break.
Yes.
So, and we weren't really prepared for that. And also we didn't have some of the medications were finished, like propofol, which you need to put people to sleep when you need to be in intensive care, for example. And also we didn't have a cover for the mouth, and we didn't have plastic cover for the faces. So that was a big problem, that we weren't prepared for this, and we didn't have supplies of everything. But also in the countries that had supplies, I mean, they had warehouses where they stored a lot of stuff. I mean, it lasts for 2 weeks, and the pandemic lasted for 2 years. So what we did was that we need to manufacture our own stuff from the beginning, and we also need to build up communication with private companies like Absolute Vodka that made hand disinfection. Hand disinfection, and so we weren't really prepared. But we learned more and more during the pandemic, and I think we learned quite rapidly, actually.
Yeah.
And there were a lot of steps taken on the local level and the regional level. They phoned to a lot of companies, can you help us with this? And they also started, I talked to the economists in one of the regions, and I said, well, your numbers are not ready for this month yet. And they said, well, all of the people are manufacturing stuff for the healthcare, so they can work. And I said, well, that's the right priority for you. Yeah.
But also, when it comes to, you've been working within a large unit or corporation internally, and also going back to how old ways of collaboration perhaps might have been put to a turn in terms of the corona COVID-19 spread. We came from the Nordic, Schengen and everything. All of a sudden, borders were closed, and the openness and willingness to share. All of a sudden, we became introverts and a little bit more protectionist around ourselves. And how did that? Did you see that in your collaboration and work together with the other Nordic countries and internally? And how was that affected? Between countries we were, but between municipalities and regions, they really started to work together. Yeah. Somebody said, well, we bought this, does anybody else need this? But they worked a lot together. And what we did also was that we saw that intensive care, the places of intensive care, it was full in a lot of hospitals. Then we started to work together and we sent the patients, okay, we have 2 places here. So we doubled the intensive care places, and very fast. And has that resulted in any changes in regulation or policies post-pandemic, or are we back to prior? Because it sounds like we were forced to collaborate in a way that actually worked in some instances. And have we learned from that and actually changed our behavior, or are we having the rubber band in the back? Some of the things went back as normal before, but some of the things we've learned, but also every new situation needs to make you act in a new way. So some things we've learned, but some things we went back to the way things were before. But I think that what we learned is you need to find new solutions for every new problem. Yeah. You cannot use the old solution for that problem. And what we say now is the problem that we will see before us if something new happens. That is the problem with medicine. Some of the medicine will run out. We know that is the bottleneck already. That we know. Yeah, that's the biggest problem that we see. Because that's very interesting. We talked about it earlier that we were a little bit caught by surprise, but I think Bill Gates said 7 or 5 years prior to the pandemic that the biggest risk was a new coronavirus actually stemming from China. So I think we knew it, and what you're saying right now, we know what the challenge will be. Yeah. There will be no pandemics. I guess other experts will but echo you on that. But working in different ways. Yes. If you save medicine, you need to use it. Refill the doses, and also we know that you can't use it forever. And we don't know which kind of medicine will we have on the next pandemic. So, talking from a pure economical lens, supply and demand is a little bit, put upside down because the demand is vague. We know that there might be, but there's currently no demand for it. And as you mentioned, the supply is very crucial then. Would you say that the supply chains and the supply is there if we want to call upon getting new medicines, or do we have a challenge there as well? We have a challenge, but I think that the best way to work with that is if we work to also here, the government, the municipalities, the regions, and the private companies, if we work together, it's so much better and it goes so much faster to find a solution on the next problem that we will have. And perhaps a dull question, but we started off talking about demographics back in the World War II.
Yeah.
And I think all the Nordic countries had the preparation. Government had said to medical companies that in times of crisis and war, we should be able to go into a war economy.
Yeah.
Now with the global economy, does it work? Or are we, both the governments in all the Nordic countries and also the corporate sphere, should we do anything more to lift this higher on the agenda?
Yeah, I think we are doing that now. Everybody's working with civil defense. So I think that we are preparing, but we don't know what the next crisis will be. That's the problem. I mean, look at, for example, now with California, with all the fires. One should think that they should know that there will be a fire because there's always fire there. But it was in a new place and things like that. So we don't know what will happen exactly, but we know there will be crisis or war or things like that. So the preparedness is to be prepared and to think of situation that ways to solve it together. The civil defense, the municipalities, the regions, and the population and the government.
Closing in on the topic of the pandemic, the pandemic has forced or actually made it possible for us to work more remotely. And that, of course, has impact on our ability to have a more healthy life and spend our time with our families and be more, have a better work-life balance. But also, it's interesting to see what do you expect from a pure economic standpoint? Where's the yield? Are we being more efficient? Have you made any studies or guesses or so when it comes to remote working and what we actually have learned from the pandemic there?
I think we are a bit more efficient, but also what we've seen is that some people, they want to work from home every day and some people wants to go to work every day. So there's been a split in the people working. I think that's a problem, that some people, they don't really want to meet people.
No, the social aspect.
Yeah.
But that also, going back to democracy aspect, because I believe, and I've tried to check that up historically, but people in the public sector, I think that goes for all Nordic countries, haven't been provided with the same ability to work remotely. How have you viewed that, and has that been a turmoil or so that you have seen the inequality in the workplace there?
Yeah, what we hear from the people working as nurses and doctors and nursing aides and things like that, they are they think it's unfair that they need to go to work when the people working with the administration can work from home. So they think they have so long working hours and they want to shorten their working hours because they think it's unfair, and it is. But also I think when we start to use AI and when we start to digitalize work, maybe more of the doctors and nurses can work from home too.
So what you're saying is that a nurse should actually suit themselves?
No. No, I think that a nurse who wants to work from home, maybe she can work with patients online instead of working with patients, meeting them face to face.
Yes, thank you. I picked that up. I was just pulling your leg a little bit.
Yeah, I know.
Moving topics into climate and how well the Nordic countries are prepared when it comes to climate changes, actually. We've seen extreme weather recently, fires in California, we're seeing flooding in Europe, and it would be interesting to see or get your point on how well equipped you see the Nordic countries are when it comes to climate change.
I think there's a lot of to be done there. And I also see that this will cost enormous amount of money. We looked at Gothenburg, for example, to make Gothenburg safe from floodings. It would cost around 40 billion Swedish crowns, which is 4 billion euros. So that's a lot of money for one municipality, and we have 290 in Sweden. Of course, not that expensive in all the municipalities, but also there's a big difference depending on where the municipality is. I mean, is it close to the sea, or is it in the mountains, or wherever it is? So there's a lot of differences between what kind of risk you have.
Going back to my general question, who should do it, who is responsible? I guess that we need to collaborate around these matters as well. But also talking about risk, the issue there is typically that we look at a risk that we have in front of our eyes, but it's difficult to see the opportunity that lies 10 years ahead. How can we incentivize local players, both companies, municipalities, etc., incentivize them to do these investments of 4 billion euros or what it may be in different regions? And how can we steer it in a better way?
Yeah, I think the government has a big problem to solve. I mean, the government in Sweden, because what I think they should do is that they should have like experts that travel around Sweden and see what are the risks here. Are there risks for landslides? Are there risks for floodings or fires, for example, and help them to like see what kind of things do you need to do here to avoid that risk, and then helping them with money also.
And do you see, with your experience, that the collaboration between the public and the private sector is good enough? Because I'm representing the private sector, and we are doing just what you're referring to.
Yeah.
We have measurements on wind, wildfire, hail, winds, rain, etc.
Yeah.
We sit on tremendous data. We have claims data, spanning 200 years back. We have forecasts, doing Monte Carlo calculations, etc. So we know our shit when it comes to risk to some extent.
Yeah.
But are you asking the right question? Not you, but the public sector.
No, I think they need to ask themselves these questions, because we know it will happen. We know there will be floodings, but we don't know where.
And going back to my question about incentivization, how do you think the funding should be made? Should it be more a steering hand from the government that this is how it should be? Could it be tax releases? Is that something that could help us?
Yeah, I think that here the government should be quite harsh, but also help with money, because some smaller municipalities, they don't have that money. In the long run, the insurance companies won't be able to pay all the money that it will cost when you have this big catastrophe.
Exactly, and that's something we're seeing already in California now. Wrapping up this discussion, now I have the wonderful opportunity to ask Annika about what are your wishes, and are there any concrete measures that you would recommend or actions that we can take going forward to actually address all those items that we touched upon today?
I think most important part is working together, that the government, municipalities and the private sector works together, because we can solve so much, and we need to think ahead. We need to think of all the things that will happen and work together. How do we solve this before it happens, and do it together? I think that's the most important part.
Have the uncomfortable, a little bit inconvenient discussions and actually lift them higher on the agenda.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Annika, for joining us today. It's been tremendous and really insightful discussion. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to every one of you listening or looking at this video podcast. Thank you so much.